You are not rational. You might think you're the type to choose facts over feelings, hovering fearlessly above the woke masses. Or maybe you're the educated, compassionate type, awake to the hidden injustices of the world, fighting valiantly against inequality. Or maybe you're the enlightened centrist, carefully analysing each issue, coming to the rational conclusion amidst juvenile chaos. Well, you are none of those. Your worldview is replete with biases, self-interest, and survival instincts. You're emotionally attracted to the identity of choosing facts over feelings, unconsciously enmeshed with a victim or savior identity, and irrationally attached to the idea of being above tribalism. You are not rational. Let me tell you why. Human brains are capable of two types of thinking. The first type is rigorous, detailed, and analyzes all information with careful attention. The technical term for this is systematic processing. Think of it as studying something in depth. Then there's also the type of thinking that draws on our experience, emotion, and instincts to make a snap decision or a decision under pressure. This is called heuristic processing. Think of it like a gut feeling. There is an obvious evolutionary advantage to making fast decisions under stress. Imagine 100,000 years ago, your ancestors were out hunting on the savannah, and one of your great times 1,000 grandfathers saw his fellow hunter get ripped to shreds by a lion. His nervous system would be in a state of trauma, and that information, linked with his visual perception, would be stored in his brain. So, next time your great ancestor goes on a hunt and sees a lion in the distance, his nervous system would respond with similar feelings. Palms would be sweaty, knees weak and heavy. He would very quickly process his emotional state, cross-reference this with his previous visual perception, do all of that in a matter of milliseconds, and of course, run for his life. Now, let's say there was a second tribe of humans that didn't have the ability to make those snap judgments, and only had the ability for the first kind of thinking. They would stop and carefully think about everything. Even if their fellow hunter had been killed, they could only analyze the situation carefully, ignore their emotional state to make a sound judgment about the second lion. Well, clearly this tribe would all eventually be killed by lions, and the first tribe would outperform the second tribe. So, making quick emotional judgments is beneficial and is built into us. Now you might be thinking, well, that's still a rational judgment. It's obvious that lions are dangerous, and having seen the evidence, it's rational to have a speedy response. Well, how about this? Let's say hypothetically, Labradors existed 100,000 years ago. Now, obviously they didn't. I don't think modern lions did either, but hypothetically speaking, for the sake of the argument, let's say they both did. And for whatever reason your ancestor was out hunting, they caught a glimpse of something with yellow fur creeping in the distance. Now this is a Labrador, but he just sees yellow fur. His nervous system responds with fear, and he immediately computes, lion, run. However, let's say there's a third tribe that can make fast intuitive judgments and careful analytic judgments. So a hunter from this third tribe courageously stops, analyzes this lion-like creature. Despite his initial fear response, waits for it to come closer, and upon inspection, realizes this is not a lion. This is a much friendlier, smaller, four-legged animal. This hunter then befriends a herd of Labradors, which he trains to hunt with him, and that third tribe can then hunt more, obtain more resources, and outperform the first tribe that can only ever make fast, intuitive judgments. So it was beneficial for us to have both fast emotional processing as well as the ability to think carefully, to not always be driven entirely by emotions and the state of our nervous system. Because environments are always changing, and we're always discovering new things about the environment, about other species, etc., it was adaptive to have both modes of thinking. Now, fast forward to maybe a couple of thousand years ago. Let's say a very early civilization is dying and decaying. Someone, to the best of their knowledge at the time, makes the detailed, careful, or systematic observation that decadence is what is causing the early civilization to crumble. Behaviors like laziness, greed, selfishness, whatever drugs they had back then, female sexual freedom, homosexuality, you name it. However, to share this complex information with others, this person encodes these observations into stories, myths, gods, maybe the god of lust or the demon of greed or whatever. These stories might be very scary, eliciting the same fear response as the lion did to our early ancestors. And hundreds of years later, a new civilization grows that is fearful of those decadent behaviors like selfishness or sexual freedom, without even having seen those behaviors and rationally analyzing them. The descendants of the original careful thinker are responding to their emotions instilled into them by those stories. As the civilization grows, more practices and behaviors develop around the information encoded into those stories, all of which humans from this civilization respond to in the same way their ancestor responded to the lion. Only the response is far more complex. It's no longer just run. It's instead, don't be greedy. Don't have sex all the time. Control your women, or whatever it may have been. Now, in this environment, thousands of years ago, these behaviors helped that particular civilization flourish, to be more productive, more egalitarian, to make people act in a beneficial way faster and effectively, to have higher fertility rates and thus a stronger army. This civilization outperforms other civilizations. So the ability to think abstractly and encode emotional responses or judgments into stories, culture, religion, etc. was beneficial and adaptive. It may not have even been a conscious attempt to embed those beliefs and behaviors into the stories. It just so happened that this way of doing things was the most effective, and thus it evolved somewhat organically. I would also strongly recommend these books on the subject. Now fast forward to the modern era. That initial society is long gone, but similar stories, myths, and cultures that allow for fast judgments about beneficial behavior exist all across the world. However, a new society begins to question their fear response to these seemingly decadent behaviors, much like the third tribe who questioned the immediate fear of lions and then discovered the Labradors. This new society questions whether it actually is bad to prevent behaviors like homosexuality, female sexual freedom, even greed. They develop new codes that harness self-interest or greed in an economic model. They allow large swaths of the population, such as gays and women, to contribute to industry, art, technology. With more minds at work, this society then goes on to outperform the ones who still maintain their inherited fear and joy responses. This new society now encodes their ideas into art, education, and music. This is more or less where we are today. As the environment, our understanding of the world, and technology inevitably changes, the cycle will continue. Throughout history, it has been beneficial to have both fast emotional judgments, which have primarily kept us safe or driven us to food, sex, or other beneficial things, and also to have the ability to think deeper about those fast emotional judgments, to think more carefully, and then to combine various combinations of each of those judgments into complex, abstract ideas, stories, practices, religions, and cultures. Today we exist in what can be described as a culture war. There are competing views of the world that, unlike the lion example long ago, involve vast ways of interpreting the world. Let's say you're a young man and you converse with a feminist who accuses you of being responsible for all the sexual violence women experience. Many other women also reject you in quite horrible ways. You experience emotional abuse from a girlfriend. Women call you an incel. You get the idea. In the same way, our ancestors' nervous system associated stress with lion, you associate stress with feminist or even women in general. And then you've created the fast, intuitive judgment, woke, dumb feminist, hates men, not worth listening to, whatever that may be. Similarly, if you're a girl and boys at school call you ugly, if you've had multiple boyfriends that treated you poorly and caused you pain, your brain detects a pattern of a nervous system under stress with the visual perception of men. and hence to protect you. It incorporates the fast, intuitive judgment. Men are trash. We live under a patriarchy, and according to you, this is a rational understanding of the world, but is incredibly influenced by your nervous system and thus your emotions. And you are then self-interested to maintain that worldview with confirmation bias or other biases. Add on top of this a social media algorithm designed to feed you content that incorporates these nervous system responses, and this further exacerbates and solidifies countless fast, intuitive, emotional judgments. And it's basically impossible to have a discussion with someone when you have more than just different ideas. You have different grounds upon which you perceive the world in order to render your nervous system stress-free. We're also far more self-interested than we may realize. Our identity and ego defense mechanisms play a huge role in these judgments. Let's say you're genuinely working hard and you're still not doing well financially. Well, the current economic system, the society at large, is causing your nervous system stress in the same way a lion caused your ancestors stress thousands of years ago. You're not going to carefully analyze all possible economic systems and come to a rational solution. It seems more likely for your nervous system responses to inform your brain and make you believe that you rationally concluded that the system needs to be dismantled. Everyone knows the common saying, people won't remember what you say, people won't remember what you do, but they will remember how you make them feel. I would go further and say people aren't attracted to a worldview based on what it says. People aren't attracted to a worldview based on what it does. People are attracted to a worldview, a culture, a philosophy, a religion, a science even, based on how it makes them feel. And they will use detailed instances of some objective thought, like studies, to rationalize their largely emotional, much more expansive view or perception of the world. This perception of the world makes you feel good and then essentially becomes your identity. You label yourself a capitalist, a feminist, a leftist, an Australian, a brown person, whatever that may be. So any potentially rational critique of that perception is an attack on a positive or neutral state of your nervous system, and you respond with what is essentially fight or flight. People just look at information that reaffirms their perception of the world, or they'll avoid information that may contradict their understanding of the world, because that is the modern version of the lion. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman, along with Amos Tversky, outline a plethora of biases in their aptly titled work, Judgment Under Pressure, Heuristics and Biases. One that stood out to me was the conjunction fallacy. The common example of this is that if I describe to you a young, bright woman with a finance degree who is passionate about progressive politics, then I ask you what is the probability that she is A, a bank teller, or B, a bank teller and a feminist. The pair found that most of the respondents in this situation ascribed higher probability to the woman being B, a bank teller and a feminist. When if you just see this question as a matter of pure probability, i.e., what is the probability of the woman being X versus the probability of the woman being both X and Y, obviously it's higher, or at the very least equal probability that she would just be X, because the probability of X and Y includes the probability of X. A couple of months ago, I was performing and I simply mentioned that I like Joe Rogan. A woman in the audience made an exasperated sigh. Now, obviously she doesn't have the time to get to know me, rationally analyze my character, and carefully make a judgment about me, and I would hope that would be a very positive judgment. Instead, her brain, based on experiences or encoded patterns, makes the judgment that the probability of me liking Joe Rogan without any other confirmed traits is less than the probability of me liking Joe Rogan plus me being toxic, dumb, meathead, whatever other additions she made in the split second from when she heard the information and she made that sign. Now, to be fair, I did the same with her. Woman with short hair upset that I listened to Joe Rogan. The highest probability is that she's just a woman with short hair, upset that I listened to Joe Rogan and nothing else, but I of course made an internal sigh because my immediate processing made plenty of additions to her character. In essence, this is stereotyping. It is adaptive for us to act upon stereotypes, especially stereotypes that elicit fear or stress. Our hunter ancestor was technically discriminating against all lions. We can't possibly carefully and systematically analyze every person with all their experiences and complexity every ideology, religion, culture, or worldview with all its nuances, especially in today's social media landscape. We have no choice but to make fast judgments based on survival, self-interest, and identity that aren't perfectly rational and arguably are not rational at all. Even those with high IQ have a higher capacity to simply store more and more complex heuristics and fast judgments and just create a more expansive way to understand the world. The intelligence trap completely dispels our judgments about smart or educated people. For example, many of you might think that all of those who are anti-climate change are likely to be uneducated or lacking intellectually, but high IQ individuals are likely to be the most in favor of climate science and policies associated with it, but also the most against it. There's so much more to these issues of biases, ideology, and consciousness. And if you want to hear me talk more about it, subscribe to either of the podcasts I co-host, Sex Cells or Neel and Jordan, because as any of you who listen know, I go into a lot more depth about this issue in particular, almost to a ridiculous degree, let's be honest. But I will end the video on this. Our brain is essentially a computer that is capable of pattern recognition, problem solving, creativity, and abstract thinking. A higher IQ relates to the computational power or hardware of this computer, but it's culture, religion, perception, and ideology that is the software. And who's coding the software? Well, more often than not, our nervous system. Your brain stores information that enables it to make quick judgments, and you are far more emotionally or irrationally attached to your various identity attributes than you realize, because that identity was developed to protect your nervous system from stress. This obviously doesn't mean no one can be trusted to make rational judgments or rational judgments are impossible to achieve, but it means a reasonable degree of intellectual, political, and cultural humility is a very, very rational thing to implement, especially today. Thanks for watching, guys.